Hi everyone and welcome to Cosmia Festival. I'm Dave, the director of the festival, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this first launch event of the festival this year, and we're really pleased to be working in partnership with Kirklees Libraries on this event. Also really pleasing is who we've got speaking tonight. I was actually looking back at my notes that I made at the back end of last year for the festival when I was trying to figure out people that might want to invite to come and speak. And tonight's author was actually on that list, so it's really great to be able to welcome her to the festival this year. Now, we're online, like a lot of festivals, so it's a shame we can't welcome you physically here to our home in West Yorkshire, in Huddersfield, but you're very welcome here online in this space. We really hope you enjoy this event and all the events in the festival, and I'm going to come back on at the end to tell you more about what else we've got going on. What I'll do now, without further ado, is hand over to the excellent Kirklees Libraries team, and we'll get this event underway.
Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us first of all. We have Hanna Jameson with us. Now she's written 4 novels, and her latest one came out last year, and it's called The Last, and it's based on murder and a post-nuclear war world, and she published her first novel at 21 years old. So I'm just going to introduce her now. Hi, Hanna.
Hi. Thank you
for joining us.
Hi, Hanna. So nice to meet you.
Hi.
I've got a question for you, actually, to kick us off.
Okay.
So you wrote your first book when you were 17, didn't you?
Yes. I wrote the first draft of it when I was 17.
Yeah.
It wasn't quite what got published, but it was a version of that, yeah.
So have you always wanted to be an author? How did it feel while you was writing it? Did it give you some kind of boost and confidence to carry on, or?
Well, I've kind of always wanted to be an author since I was about 7 or 8. And I was kind of lucky in that no one actually told me how hard it was to do. So I grew up for a lot of my childhood thinking, oh yeah, you can just, like, anyone can just do that. That's cool. I'm just like to do that. So I was writing through kind of most of my school years, really. And I wrote my first draft of a completed novel, which was like a crime spy thriller, when I was about 15. And it was really bad because I was 15. And then I wrote a first draft of a different crime thriller when I was 17. And I was fortunate in that my English literature teacher at the time, he was a really great writer, and I was told to take it to him. So he was my first editor, and he was the person who kind of helped me shape that draft into what it became later, which was something that was actually publishable.
Wow.
So that's my backstory. I mean, there's a lot of like complications and stuff like in the middle of that. It certainly wasn't a straightforward process at all. I actually ended up getting published right when I gave up on getting published for a bit. So, you can't account for those interventions from luck, really.
Wow.
So, for the current book that you've written, The Last, I'm just wondering, would you say, I know this is a very deep question to start off with, but would you say it's a sociological study of what humans would react like in a very unnerving or catastrophic event?
Well, that was actually what a lot of my research for the project was about. So I wouldn't say it's a sociological study, because it's only based on sort of my own imagination and my own perceptions. But I read a lot about disaster psychology in the run up to writing it. Not because I was particularly planning to write it, but just because that was something that really interested me. And there was an amazing book which God, I can't for the life of me remember its title, but it's called something like the worst case scenario, or when the worst happens, or something like that. And it was a woman who she interviewed all of these people who are in very different disaster situations, from plane crashes to hostage situations. She interviewed people who were in the Twin Towers when the planes crashed into them. And there were some really interesting reactions, and it showed that you basically have very little control over your reactions to initial events unless you train your brain to function in a certain way. So people who paranoid people, for want of a better word, like people who think through these scenarios quite obsessively, will react generally better because it's something their brain has already kind of rehearsed for. Whereas if you go into shock, the most common reaction in any situation is to just freeze. Which is why you get really bizarre events like there was a fire at a resort in, I think it was America. I'm going to say it was America. There was a fire that ripped through a hotel resort while a wedding party was taking place. And some of the hotel staff went into like the big kind of ballroom kind of thing. And they said, everyone just stay where you are. Like, don't get out of your seats. It's safer if you just don't panic. And then this waiter who was like, what the hell? Like, what are you doing? Jumped up on stage and was like, get out. Everyone get out of your seats. And like when he was like dragging people up and like pushing them towards the doors, and the ones that went with the waiter were the ones that survived, but the ones that decided to stay in their seats were found burnt to death in their seats, as in they literally didn't move. They actually sat there as the flames engulfed them. And I thought that was such an interesting story about how human beings can react to severe shock, and also just to being told what to do by an authority in a situation. So it shows how easily people can like manipulate crowds and stuff like that. Like all of that stuff is really fascinating to me. So yeah, that was kind of what I was reading in the run up to writing the last.
So do you think that your own experiences and the environment you were brought up in kind of influences what you write about then?
Yeah, I think it can't help but influence what you write. Not that everyone's writing has to be autobiographical, but it's, it can only be based in your own experiences and perceptions of things. I've had I don't think any big disasters happen in my life like that. But then it is definitely informed by, say, just kind of being a young person. Well, relatively young person. I'm 30 now. But, in my lifetime, I graduated into one once in a lifetime recession, which like no jobs straight away. And then all I've known throughout my whole adult life is just forever war. The Iraq war and Afghanistan war, they were like the first kind of political awareness I had. And the war on terror and just that, that really psychopathic era, like, growing up in that. And then hitting 30 and then having a pandemic and going into another once in a generation recession. And I think my writing is definitely very informed by that. And also by the fact that climate change is just a looming spectre over everything all the time. Like, no matter how bad the world is, that's worse. So yeah, I'd say like it's not informed by my life personally, but it is informed by growing up in just a world which a lot of generations feel like they live through the end times, but we might actually do it, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You can tell from the way your book is based on post-nuclear world, and I just found it very interesting how you've mixed murder with the end of the world. You wouldn't really think you wouldn't really think that something so catastrophic would be with something minor in that situation. So what made you put murder and a catastrophic event together in one book?
Well, it was kind of an accident in that I had about 12,000 words of a hotel-based murder mystery written, and just in a document hidden away on my laptop for a couple of years. And I was in the middle of a 3-book contract at the time, so I couldn't really do anything with it. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, I really want to write something like this, but it's just something about the idea isn't grabbing me enough. It's not making me want to go through the absolute hellscape of writing a novel. And then a friend of mine, completely unrelated, who is a historian, who similar biographical details to John, emailed me and mentioned that his commute for work was between New York and Mississippi, and he did that like every month. And I thought, God, that's a lot. And then for some reason my brain just went, but what if something happened when you were displaced from your usual routine? And then I became fascinated by the idea of what would happen if disaster struck and you were displaced from your family, your friends, sort of everything that you would plan to be around you when a disaster struck. You never think it's going to be when you're on holiday or like at a conference or something like that. And so how would someone deal with not just the disaster aspect, but the fact that they're surrounded by all of these unknowns, and in a trapped claustrophobic building scenario with a ton of people who they don't know. So that's how that particular kind of mishmash of genres came together. But the murder that I wrote about wasn't based on a real murder, but it was certainly inspired by one. It was inspired by the Elise Lam case in Los Angeles, where a Chinese Canadian student was staying at a hotel sort of backed onto Skid Row, a hotel that used to be really grand and kind of, it's not so grand now, but it's just been refurbished. And it was a hotel with a weird past. There's been lots of strange kind of suicides and ghost stories and just weirdness associated with the hotel. And she went missing while she was staying there. And it became like this famous internet sensation. Like, I don't know if you remember it from like 2014. But the YouTube, they released footage of her in the 2-week period that she was missing. And the last footage of her alive was in the hotel elevator on a floor that wasn't her floor, and she was acting very erratically and pressing all of the buttons and sort of looking out as if she was being chased and stuff. And the police released that footage to see if anyone recognized her. And then a couple of weeks later, a guest in the hotel complained about the water place being funny. And they searched the rooftop water tanks and found her body in one of the rooftop water tanks. So that, I mean, yeah, it's not based on that murder, but it was definitely inspired by reading about that particular murder, because the drinking water thing really stayed with me.
Yeah. As you take a drink.
Oh, that's not water. That's fine.
So when you do you have to plan your stories, or do you just put pen to paper and see where it takes you? Do you set it out what's going to happen, or how do you do it?
I don't personally. I know some writers plan everything, like they do chapter outlines and stuff. I can't really work like that. I think it's just my brain won't work if it already knows what it's going to do. So I have to kind of trick it to be interested in projects that I'm working on. And for some reason it works. Like, I think the brain is capable of putting a story together if you just know how story works. So I'll have a very loose idea of where the plot might go. Yeah. And I have ideas for specific scenes that I'm really excited about. So I kind of think of them like road stops, where I think, I don't know what's going to happen on the way there, but I want to get to there, and then I want to get to there. And
you've got a destination of where it's going to go.
Yeah. In a way. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I can't do like detailed outlines and stuff like that. I really envy people who can, because it's probably a really efficient, great way of working. I just kind of throw myself at things and hope it works out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can totally relate to not being able to plan when writing. But in regards to your book, The Last, your character makes decisions that obviously in an unnerving situation. Are they based on decisions that you would make if you were in that position yourself?
Some of them, I think. I disagree with a few of John's decisions. I think I'm not always looking at what my characters are doing and thinking, yeah, great guys, you're doing well. A lot of them, I think, did make very stupid decisions, but I kind of think of it as I get out of their way to tell the story when it comes to decision making. So any decision making they make has to be in character, and I can't kind of impose my idea of what's a good idea onto that. Otherwise it would just be a story about me and a load of other people who are also acting like me. I don't know if I would have done, I can't think of specific things I would have done very differently. I probably would have tried to not make certain people feel as interrogated as he did. But then I also don't know how I'd react in that completely insane situation. So he was probably doing his best.
Would you ever team up with another author to like write a new book altogether, or would you rather work on your own?
I don't know. I love the idea of working with another author, and there
Yeah.
are some authors who I've talked about doing collaborative projects with, but I think that would probably be screenwriting more so than a novel. I have no idea what it would be like to write a novel with another person, because it's such a kind of, I don't know, you've just got to get in a box with it and go mad kind of thing. I don't know how to have that rational conversation about what's going to happen next, or writing styles, or continuity, or anything. It's just so insular. Whereas, for screenwriting, absolutely, because it's a collaborative process kind of inherently. Whereas the novel is isolated.
And
I don't know if, sorry, I don't know whether that actually answered your question. I did.
You're so used to writing on your own and writing your own book, aren't you? So,
yeah, exactly. It would be quite a change. It would be quite a change to do that. Though I'm very jealous of authors who have managed collaborations. I think it must be.
You never know. Once The Last makes it onto Netflix, you might be writing a lot more screenwriting.
Yeah, possibly. I'm doing screenwriting projects at the minute that aren't The Last, but I certainly would like to spend more time with them than I am. Definitely.
I might be looking a bit too much into your novel, but I was wondering, do you know when John gives the speech of him wanting to be useful without giving away to obviously everyone what the book is about? Would you say that's in relation to the beginning where he's letting Nadia and the children down because he wasn't useful to them and he wasn't there for them?
Yeah, definitely. I think, actually, I don't think that's looking too much into the novel at all. Like, I think that is John's character arc in a massive way. To me, like, John, there's a reason that I decided that he'd be a kind of white, relatively well-off American liberal, because his whole life he's been able to kind of comfortably think of himself as a good person, but without ever having to actually act like one in any given situation. Like, he's, in his interpersonal relationships, he's a piece of garbage, and he's very aware that he is, but nothing has ever pushed him to change, because when you're in John's position, why would you change? And so when the world changes as dramatically as it does, I think John's arc is about finding that line between acting like a good person and having previously just thought, believed he was a good person. And I think, it's a huge, like, process for him to be in a situation where he's constantly like, oh, I have to do things. And he's never been called upon to do things before and actually felt the immediate pressure to act. So yeah, definitely.
Sorry,
Hannah, can I just snip in? I was about to say the word useful at the end of the book actually stayed with me. That kind of, without trying to give away again too much of the ending here for anyone that hasn't read the book, but that kind of, when they're with the new community and the word useful is kind of bandied around, that to me was one of the things that kind of lasted after I was worried for the future of some of the guests in the hotel. I thought that was really interesting, and what made me think about was that kind of it kind of left the novel kind of that you could start to still kind of think about it afterwards, and it wasn't kind of tied up, is how I felt. So that's one of the things that I was really interested to know. Is that something that do you like a neatly tied up ending to a novel, either as a writer or a reader, or do you like that kind of freedom or leave the reader still kind of wondering?
I don't think I like neat and tidy endings that much, because I like them as in I like them. It will be satisfying, but they don't always feel real. They don't always feel like something that actually happens, because in my experience, like, nothing has a clean or a pleasant or a neat ending. There are always going to be things which are left sort of not tied up. And a couple of, like, I don't really read reviews, but people do message me with their opinions. Because I really want feedback. No, I don't. And a few people have said, oh, it just felt like really unconcluded. Like, can't you explain what happened? And I'm just like, dude, it was a nuclear war. Like, how much more can I explain it at this point? Like what do you want? Do you want me to solve the end of the world for you, or you want like 800 more chapters of everyone dying slowly of radiation poisoning. Like, what do you want? So yeah, like, yeah, it wasn't meant to have a neat or conclusive ending because there can't be one, basically.
No.
Yeah.
The word useful still haunts me though. What does that mean? What does it mean?
I mean, it was definitely meant to. I didn't want to write something that felt hopeless. I actually think the book is quite optimistic in a weird way. It's certainly more optimistic than I am as a person. It's more optimistic than anything I thought I would write. But the word useful, I think it was there to kind of signify what could potentially go wrong. And that's kind of when the new society, which is still kind of working out a way to live and a way to accommodate everyone, starts to basically means test things and basically replicate the awful facets of the society that we live in now. Because the thing about an apocalyptic event is that they're not just degenerative, sort of soul-destroying, like violent traumatic processes. They're also a kind of stripping away of structures, which are both good and bad. So they're also an opportunity in which people can build something else, and they either build something else that's better than before, which there is an opportunity for them to do. And I think that's kind of signified in the place the characters end up.
Yeah.
But then when people talk about being useful, then it hints at there are going to be pushes to get back into a situation where people are just defined by what they can give of themselves, you know. And I think that's kind of what's wrong with a lot of what's wrong with our society now, is that we're just obsessed with people being productive and people not actually living in a healthy way. Yeah, I think that's what I meant by useful.
Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah, cool. And it's better society in the forest. I mean, in the forest is a whole other thing. Yeah. Loved all that. Brilliant. Sorry, girls. Sorry, Hannah.
Okay. Do you read similar books to what you write? Like, do you read a lot of thriller books, or do you prefer different genres?
I kind of ricochet wildly between loads of stuff. I used to read loads of crime thrillers and gothic horror and stuff like that, like, you know, like 10 years ago. And then recently I haven't been reading thrillers at all. I've been reading some dystopian stuff. I've been reading some, I don't know, high literature. I've been reading a lot of fantasy recently, actually. Like, I've been in a real kind of fantasy frame of mind. So I've mostly been reading like Chinese fantasy novels mostly, very specific in genre. I don't know why. I think it's probably a coping mechanism. As much as it is something I'm genuinely interested in, it's probably because the worse the world gets, the more I kind of seek specific types of escapism. And I moved away from certain genres of sci-fi because I found them too, I don't know, depressing, for want of a better word. So yeah, I mean, I read loads of stuff. I like romance. I like loads of stuff.
Yeah, it's like reading.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like TV as well, so I watch probably more TV than I read these days.
Really?
I'm just really obsessed with TV. Yeah.
A year on from when you've last written the last, it rings more true that it might be what you think it could happen. Do you think there's a possibility that the last is a very real scenario that is in the near future for us guys?
No, not in the near future. No, I mean, you literally can never predict what's going to happen. I mean, I think we all found that out this year. But I think, God, it's so depressing to think about. I think climate change is going to be the deal breaker for most of us, really, because that's going to hit food supply chains pretty soon, and you know, the whole clean drinking water, like, you know, the super rich buying up water reserves and stuff. It doesn't look great. And I don't think it's going to be nuclear war. I think it's going to be climate change and the ensuing shit fight over resources, really. Sorry. Fight over resources. Am I allowed to swear? Sorry.
We're fine.
Yeah. basically.
So do you think that this like pandemic kind of situation is going to influence one of your next books?
Annoyingly, I started writing a novel which it wasn't about a pandemic, but it's definitely like pandemic psychology.
Yeah.
But I started it last year. So by the time it's published, it's going to look like, oh, she's written a pandemic novel. How original. And it's like, no, I foresee these things. But I started writing a novel which is basically a dystopian love story. Because I'm interested in how people react to traumatic situations, and I just like to explore. Yeah, I think the last thematically was very much about justice, or like ideas of justice and theories of justice, and what that could look like in a situation where society has been demolished and rebuilt. And then I got really into the idea of like what interpersonal relationships, what dating and love and stuff, what that actually looks like during the end of the world as well. Although the backdrop to the end of the world is very different, because it's not a pandemic, but a lot of people think it is, because no one actually knows what it is. But it's a mass event that hits certain people, and certain people don't know when they're going to be next. There's no way of predicting it, kind of thing. I can't tell you what it is, it's too spoilery.
Yeah.
So, also because I haven't finished writing it yet. So but yeah, it's about how people actually build relationships in that kind of situation, because like I have friends of mine who, even trying to maintain friendships now, it's completely different. Like, how do you maintain romantic relationships? How do you maintain like marriages, and how do you parent people in this situation and stuff?
Yeah, I think there's a lot you can take from this year, like to put into a book. There's a lot of different aspects that's been going on. It's been a really big year for everyone, really. It's affected a lot of people.
Yeah, literally. A massive global trauma. Yeah.
On a more like, I wouldn't say light-hearted, but a different tone. Why Scotland?
Depressing.
Why did you choose to completely eradicate Scotland?
Oh, Scotland.
You hate the Scottish? Is that the question? Hanna, why do you hate the Scottish? I don't know. I wrote the book when I was in Scotland, so. I was living in Edinburgh at the time. I was living in Edinburgh for the 6 months that it took me to write the book. So it was the fact that I messaged some people and I said, so, I had a scientist friend who I just asked everything. And I was like, in a nuclear war, do you think Scotland would go? And he'd be like, yeah, because like Trident. And I was like, oh God, yeah. So I thought, oh yeah, Scotland would be gone. And then I was like, oh, Scotland's gone, yeah. That was how I came to that conclusion.
I'm so glad you asked that question. I've been wondering that. What does Scotland do?
Not because I hate Scotland.
Oh dear. We've actually had a question come in from someone watching. Should we just go to this one? Is that right, Hanna and Anne?
Yeah, that's fine.
I just bring this one onto the screen. Okay. Yeah. So it's from Laura. Do you think the current pandemic situation has changed how you think and write about apocalyptic scenarios? Ooh, icon there, Laura, as well. Very cool.
I know. I was looking at the icon as well. I was like, I like that. That's a really good question, actually. Yes and no. Yes, because I don't think anyone ever saw a pandemic event playing out like this. I think whenever we sort of read and write about pandemics, we think of things like The Stand, and we think of like Station 11, and we think of like world-ending events where like most of humanity is wiped out, and it's all very dramatic and sudden. But this hasn't really been like that. It's not like we've been plunged into a post-apocalyptic hellscape. We're just stuck with a very heightened version of the hellscape we had already. So in the sense, it hasn't changed my idea about apocalyptic scenarios, in that the etymology of the word apocalypse is from the Greek word apokalypsis, which doesn't actually mean an ending at all. It means to reveal. And I think that kind of tells you more about what apocalypses actually do. They don't actually end the world. They just reveal stuff about it, which people were choosing to not acknowledge or was quite well hidden already. So apocalypses are kind of revelations about society. It's a lens through which to look at yourselves. And I think what this pandemic has done in quite a stark way is expose the cracks that were in the foundations of our society already. And you can see this in that, it's not a great leveler. People aren't dying at the same rates. 2/3 of the victims have been disabled people who were, oppressed by the way we live anyway. And there have been higher rates of death in Black people and people of color. So yeah, I think even in this case, it has kind of just shown that apocalyptic events, yeah, they change things, but they actually just reveal a lot of shit that was already there and that wasn't being dealt with in the first place. And I think this is what the pandemic has done. So yeah, in that sense, it wouldn't change how I would write the apocalyptic genre. I think the only way it has changed things and that I didn't see everyone being forced to stay inside and not touch each other kind of thing. I mean, that was something that I had never imagined.
Yeah. Obviously really passionate about thrillers and writing about thrillers. Would you ever write a book of a different genre, maybe do a romance novel, a fantasy novel or anything?
I would love to do a fantasy novel.
Yeah.
I actually messaged my agent about it, and she was kind of like, "Don't do your next novel as a fantasy novel," which is understandable because it just makes no sense as a career trajectory. So it wouldn't be like, for fans of The Last, here, have some epic fantasy. That's not marketable, is it? So yeah, I'd love to write a fantasy novel. I would love to write a romance novel, and I think that's why I've taken the sharp turn into romance that I have. Because my next novel, I don't think has many thriller elements to it. Okay. It's dystopian, but it's such a slow burn style of dystopia that it's not like people running around like fashioning weapons and stuff. It's mostly life going on as normal, but just a lot of people are dying. So yeah, I think I am writing a romance novel next, to be honest. But I would love to write a fantasy.
Yeah, it'd be cool.
Yeah.
When you were writing the last and you were deciding who gets to survive the events, did you ever think about, oh well, do you know what, I'll kill this character off just to toy with the readers, or was it a more logical?
No, I can't say I ever do that. I don't think I ever make decisions with the reader in mind in that sense. I think I read, oh no, it wasn't an interview, it was something someone just told me about him. But like certain creators, I'm not going to name them now, certain creators do things like kind of react against fans. So like if fans like a particular character, it's like, oh yeah, we'll mess with this character because that'll really like upset everyone or stuff like that. I don't treat characters like that. It's either you survive because it makes sense for the narrative, or you die because it makes sense for the narrative. And sometimes that's tragic and sometimes it's unexpected. But I really hate this idea. And I think it's made a lot of certainly TV worse. In that creators think in order to have an unpredictable plot, they have to make characters act unpredictably, which often means that characters act out of character in order for shocking things to happen. And so people think there's more value in the shock than in consistent characterization. And I just don't think that's ever how you have to like play around with things narratively. I think if you follow where the characters go, people are a mess. Like people make bad decisions that are based in just the traumas that they've been through, or the way that they are, or the way that they react to certain triggers or certain people. Like you can make people make bad decisions and have tragic things happen, but without them ever acting out of character. And that's the kind of tragedy I prefer. I prefer kind of very self-inflicted tragedies. That's I love that. I love it. And that's how I like to write too.
I like that.
How would you feel about writing a sequel? Like, so having it so it follows on another book?
I don't think I'd write a straight sequel. So I don't think I'd write another book from John's perspective. But I have thought about another book in the same universe and what that might look like. Because John had an extremely specific experience of nuclear
Yeah.
war. Whereas I've often considered that writing a book from his wife's perspective would be so different. So I think if I were to write another book in the same universe, I'd write it possibly from Nadia's perspective.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Carrying on from different narratives, how reliable would you say John's narrative is? Because he's just been through a catastrophic event, and he's narrating everyone else's reactions. Could he be exaggerating things, or acting in a trauma kind of way? Or
Yeah, definitely. Because he's a historian. So, the reason I made him a historian is because he's a compulsive record keeper, but someone who is also very aware that he's writing in a kind of historical tradition. Like he wouldn't be writing for himself. So whenever like Nathan keeps calling it a diary, he's like, no, it's a record, and gets like quite defensive about it because it's not for him, it is for a future audience. So yeah, I think John is massively unreliable, and I think that's made particularly explicit at the very end of the novel with the addendum that is on it, which I won't say, but I think that is made very clear at the end.
Do you ever include people that you know, like certain personalities that you've recognised in your own books? So you've met a friend and you think, oh, their sort of character would really fit into a book that I'm writing, or do you just make them up?
I make my characters up in that they're not, when they appear in my head, they're not people I know. Yeah. But often they might very closely resemble people I know. I think because, the human brain literally can't create a face you haven't seen before. It can only remember faces. So I think there's always people in mind. And sometimes it's famous people. Like sometimes I write with an idea of an actor in the part. And that's probably the most common thing I do. Or I take a specific trait that I notice in someone and I like superimpose it onto someone else. And often, there is actually a name in the novel who is actually just the full name of a friend of mine. And that's because we've had a previous conversation about how his name was so unique that it had only ever appeared in literature once before. So I said, I'm just going to name a character. But yeah, I wouldn't do that kind of thing without asking them first, because people would probably find it pretty weird. Or possibly, I don't know.
I look forward to seeing us all in your next novel.
Yeah.
I think people are only likely to be in one of my novels either if they're a really close friend of mine, or if they're someone I really, really hate.
Nice questions, girls. Nice questions.
So as Kirk Lees, we support our local writers. As a writer as a well-known writer yourself, what advice would you give them?
What, for becoming a writer?
Yeah, to expanding what they're doing and to, I guess, success.
The most obvious, this is really difficult because I'm always loath to give publishing advice because publishing is unpredictable. And there really is no secret to it other than being just bloody-minded levels of persistent. I think I read a really good quote, I think by the author Chuck Wendig. I think it was possibly by Chuck Wendig, where he said, "You're not dead in this industry until you stay dead." And I think the key to getting published is persistence. The key to writing well is to, once you commit to something past a certain stage, make sure you finish it, and develop self-editing skills. But really, it's just finish stuff, finish your projects, because you can't edit nothing. That's the only good writing advice I generally have to give about anything, because everything else is so specific to me. Some people have to write in sequence, some people can't write in sequence, or they write their favorite scenes first. And I think it's probably important to be quite adaptable, in that your writing style is never your writing style. It can differ hugely from project to project. So just be prepared to not always do things the way you've always done them.
Yeah.
If I was writing, say, if I was writing a fantasy, say a high fantasy novel, I probably would have to plan that, because the detail of world building that I'd need to do is on a different scale to anything I've ever worked on before. So I would probably have to throw my own routines out the window in order to write a book like that. But I think as long as you're prepared to do that, then you can do pretty much anything. With finished stuff and with publishing, it's God. I mean, honestly, the best thing you can do is just be rich. Know someone rich.
Yeah.
And like, if you can't do that, then God, like, just be like, I won't die. Just be like, I will keep doing this until I just keep kicking at the door until they let you in. But yeah, like, luck has factored into so many career trajectories. Like, there are certain things you just can't plan for. But persistence is something you have control over.
Mm-hmm. All right, that's a good answer. Good answer.
It doesn't make sense.
Pass it on to the groups, or pass it on to the groups. I like that.
How long does it take to write one of your books? Does it take a few months, or can they be quite quick to write?
They can be. The last I only wrote in 5 months.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah, and I wish, frankly, I could do that again, because so that was a nice time of my life where I could write a book in 5 months. I will never be able to do it again, possibly. My first novel took 8 months, which again was very good. Oh my God, you know what? I think it's just because back then social media didn't exist. But then this year there has been a pandemic. So I don't think I've been in the right mindset to write very well this year. Due to the kind of low-level stress and dread that comes with everyday life at the minute.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it varies hugely. I mean, it's been so long. I mean, because I've been writing on screenwriting projects, I haven't written consistently for a novel for a while. So this one is going to take time, I think.
What's your opinion on social media? Do you think that it's really good, or do you think it's had a negative impact on?
I think it's
on the
really
society?
good and really bad.
Yeah.
It's got its good. It's hard to argue with its good sides, in that I think mass communication has made certain friendships possible that weren't possible before. It's really hard to find a group of people who are into what you're into. And I spend a lot of time in fandom spaces. I mean, I've been in fandom spaces all my life, but like online fandom, it's so easy to make friends with people who live in wildly different places. I have so many internet friends who've become really good personal friends who I've known for years. The bad side of it is that it's completely messed up my attention span, my ability to concentrate, my ability to not look at my phone.
Yeah. It's quite addictive for some people, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's really addictive. And I think especially for people who aren't neurotypical as well. So like if you have ADHD or ASD and you have access to social media, it's just like, I don't know, it's like like a pointer for a cat kind of thing. Or at least that's my experience of it. So yeah, I think, you know, good points and bad points. There's a lot that I hate about it, which is why I actually deactivated my main Twitter account. It just got to the point where I thought I haven't read a book in weeks. And then I deactivated my main Twitter and I finished a novel this afternoon. And I was like, I think I've unlocked some powerful knowledge here. It stops me from doing things.
Yeah, I agree. It's quite destructive and it's slowing the world down in some ways.
Yeah.
But, in regards to your novel, why did you name, apart from the obvious reason, because we think they're the only survivors, why the last? Because we don't actually know, do we?
No. Do you mean why was it titled that way?
Yeah.
It wasn't actually my title. My title was something different. I actually thought my title was amazing. But I was informed it was slightly too sci-fi for the market they wanted to sell the novel to, which was kind of crime literary kind of thing. So the title, I don't mind the title, but the title was definitely picked to be more accessible and generic. No, generic is a better word actually. So yeah, it's not a bad title. It just wasn't my title. I never get to keep my titles.
Oh. So, sorry, I'm going to ask her. So, given that you've never been able to keep your titles, do you pick your titles? Do they come to you like as you're writing, or is it something you think at the end, or do you start with I want to call this book this, and this is what it's going to go? How do you, even though you don't get to keep them?
One day I will get to keep them.
Keep at it. Your fantasy novel. Just keep the title for that one.
Before climate change gets there.
Yeah, all I want is to keep one title before climate change. It's like, is that too much to ask? It varies. I like to have a title before I start, but sometimes it has to come to you because you write something and you think, oh, there it is. You wouldn't know it without that process having taken place. So I would prefer to start with one, but I don't always get that.
Yeah. How much freedom do you have when you write your books? Do you always have people like giving you loads of guidance and telling you what to do, or do you usually get what you want to do? Do you get your way, or?
Content is different. Authors don't generally get control over covers or titles because that's not the book, that's branding. And that's not the author's purview so much. I'm sure like certain authors, if you're like a Stephen King, you're going to get to name your novel what you want. But in terms of content, there's nothing I've had to give up which means a huge amount to me. And I think a lot of the time editors, it's very rare that an editor will point out something that you don't already know is wrong. There have been very few situations where someone's pointed out a glaring problem or a scene that just doesn't work, and I've thought, oh God, really? Like, I thought it was fine. It's always like, I know. And it's not like you palm it off and you kind of hope they won't notice, but when they tell it to you, you're like, oh yeah, I kind of knew. I knew that scene wasn't as good as the others. And then it just kind of kicks your brain into a different gear. But sometimes you just need that second opinion to like confirm your own perspective on things, because your own perspective on the manuscript by the time you finish writing it is just, it's worth nothing because you've just been this close to it the whole time.
If you put aside, obviously, outside criticism, I hear a lot about writer's block. Do you get writer's block, and how do you address it?
Writer's block? Yes. I mean, I am skeptical of the term writer's block, I think. I think it's just being stuck. But saying you're stuck doesn't sound really sexy. You need to make it sound like a kind of Victorian affliction. Where it's like, oh, I'm lying on a couch with writer's block, and everyone's like, God, that's sexy and romantic. Like, you've got writer's block. Oh, how terrible for you. Whereas if you just say I'm stuck, no one ever has any empathy. So yeah, I get stuck a lot. And it sucks. It's really not good at all. And there's no process for really getting out of it either. The process I found out doesn't work is staring at your document for 6 hours, which is what I tend to do. And I still do it. If if it's not working, I just sit here and I'm like, well, if I just stare at my computer and feel bad, then I'll just have to start writing. That's not how it works. Usually it only goes away if I start reading something or if I start watching something. And then, because you're absorbing media or because you're going outside or doing something, your brain starts to generate ideas again. Whereas if you just sit there looking at the blank page, your brain does nothing. It just goes, well, that sucks. Sorry about that.
Would you like one of your books to be put made into a film, or would you prefer it just to stay as a novel?
Yes, I mean, I write all of my novels with the idea that they will go on to become screenplays. Because I don't know, like films and TV are where I get the majority of my ideas from as well. So I think I probably consume more film and TV than I do books. So I write things with a kind of cinematic style, I guess. They lend themselves to TV and film very well. So yeah, I mean, I'd be delighted to see The Last turn into a film. I don't have a
Yeah.
particular vision of it as a film, but I'm sure they'll do a good job with it. Yeah, all of them. And they've all been optioned now, so like
There's lots of action to include into the film. Lots that goes on in your books for it to make it into a very gripping film.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things they can do with it. They could turn
Yeah.
it. I hope they go kind of the weirder they go with it, the better. I hope.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, if we were to put you in your novel, would you stay in the hotel or would you leave?
I think I'd stay. You're remote. Like during a situation like that, I think you would be trying to get somewhere remote anyway. So unless I panicked and thought, oh no, I'm gonna like going to an airport is ridiculous in that situation. I can't see myself doing it. I like to think I'd react like Tommy. If I were reacting like anybody, I would like to react like Tommy.
So where do you see your career going? Like, do you have a new book that you want to do, or do you just think it's just going to stay as thrillers? Do you have any ideas of where you want your career to go in the future?
Yes, I would like to. I would like to transition into screenwriting full time. To be honest, just because that's kind of where I've always wanted to go anyway. Screenwriting it's hard in different ways, but it's so much more gratifying and fun than writing a book. So I'd like to just kind of focus on TV projects, and I think I'll definitely write this book and release this book, but I don't see myself ever being a book a year author. I'm always going to be working on multiple projects, and I think most of those are going to be for screen.
Yeah.
I would also like to. I don't know. Like I'm finishing a history degree as well, so I would like to teach at some point in my life at maybe a graduate level. But that's just something I kind of want to do for fun, maybe.
Yeah.
When I'm in my 40s or 50s or something, if we're all still alive then.
Do the films that you watch help influence what you're going to write about? Do they give you inspiration?
Yeah, massively. I'm a huge fan of horror, particularly.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of obvious reading The Last, in that I think it's as much a horror novel as it is anything else. In that it's uneasy, it's horrifying, it's a strange situation. Everyone is carrying kind of weird experiences with them, and experiences are kind of heightened because of disaster situations. I was just watching the most recent episodes of Unsolved Mysteries, and one of them is about the tsunami that hit Japan that killed like 15,000 people a few years ago. And it's a really kind of profoundly moving story about ghosts, about people having ghostly experiences because disaster kind of opens people up to that kind of thing. I love to incorporate elements like that into everything I write. I think horror is a really underrated, unexplored genre.
Yeah.
That should get more accolades, to be honest.
You said you wanted to go into screenwriting, so what made you go into actual writing novels instead of straight into screenwriting?
I did not talk to a careers advisor about this. This was just my thinking, which I think actually I've been proven right in a lot of ways. I went into writing novels, well, one, because I had more ideas about how to write novels, but the path to being published, I think, is it is hard as hell, but it is still easier than breaking into film and TV with no contact. Every kind of foot in the door I've had into screenwriting, like producers who've optioned my work, or people who I've become friends with, people who've mentored me through learning to screenwrite, those are people I wouldn't have met if it hadn't have been for publishing. And there are so few inroads into actually being in those situations, which is why I think so many screenwriters start out as like PAs. So yeah, it was a very convoluted. It still allowed me to write and get things published and tell stories and stuff like that, but it was a route in. It was my preferred route into the industry, basically.
What did you study at college? Did you study media or anything that influenced you and what you wanted to do?
The first time around, university.
Just any education. What have you studied that's given you inspiration? Yeah, or high
level,
school, college, university.
Yeah, at college level, I studied sociology, media, English, literature, just things I was really interested in. The first time around I went to university, I studied American history. Well, it was an American studies degree, but it was basically American literature and American history, because that was just where my interests were.
Yeah.
And then I dropped out because I got signed. So I only completed a year of that degree. But I'm finishing a history degree with the Open University at the minute because I felt really bad about dropping out of uni, even though it was for a good reason. I don't like leaving things unfinished, and I don't like quitting things. So I transferred my credits from my first degree to the Open University and just wanted to finish a history degree, basically. So I finished that next year, hopefully.
So outside of writing and reading, what else do you enjoy doing? Do you have any other hobbies like artwork or, I don't know, anything else that you like doing?
At the minute, I really like not writing. I like that a lot. What do I like doing? Oh, I like
you have to have it.
I like swimming. Yeah, I like swimming.
Yeah.
That's probably the main thing I do that doesn't involve sitting down. Swimming. I like languages. I'm learning Mandarin at the minute. Because oh my God, tell you what, if you love reading, learn a language which has a different alphabet or a different system of reading. It's just the best thing ever. It's so good. So when I was sort of making forays into other languages this year, I learned the Korean phonetic alphabet, which is Hangul, which is just a delight. I think it's better than the Roman alphabet. It's just such a good alphabet. And then because I'm learning Mandarin, I'm learning Hansa as well. So, and Hansa is, because it's not phonetic, they signify concepts rather than sounds. It just makes you feel like a superhero if you learn anything. And it's such an interesting, it's just such a fascinating thing to do. I think if you love reading, learning to read in another language is just incredible.
Yeah.
So I can highly recommend that.
I'll have a go.
On an eerie note, you mentioned ghosts earlier on. Have you had any encounters, or do you believe in them?
Yes, I believe in ghosts. I haven't personally had any really scary ghost encounters. I have had weird stuff happen to me, but not stuff I would describe as ghost stories. But I do collect them compulsively from pretty much everyone I meet. And there's a few which are just particularly harrowing. So one of the stories that made it into the last about the boy who was in the corner, that was a story that someone just kind of told me one time. And it was just loosely based on that, really. So if I mention something, it's usually based in something that someone has told me. It's not something that's come fully from my head. I collect ghost stories because I like to kind of play with them elsewhere. I believe in ghosts. Yeah.
Any other questions anyone else has?
Dave, did you have one question that you wanted to ask?
The other thing I was asked about, so I listened to the last as an audiobook.
Yeah.
And it worked really well, I thought, because of the way that the story's told. So I was just interested in why you picked that kind of point of view and that voice rather than telling it as a more traditional story.
Do you mean in third person? So
the kind of like he's writing not a diary.
Oh, like
so why that way?
I think it was partly to justify the use of first-person perspective, which I like to write in anyway. But I thought doing it as like day 1, day 2, it just kind of added it added something. I wanted the whole thing to feel like a historical record of a disaster. And through the method of writing, I wanted to show the deterioration in his mental state as he went along. And, you know, an epistolary format is a really just fun way to play around with that, because it leads people to kind of make their own conclusions about how stable he actually is. So yeah, that's why I chose to do it like that. And I think it was because I read really good books where I read The Martian, which has that kind of structure as well, and I thought it worked really well.
Yeah, cool, thank you. No, it works great. And I'll say, as an audiobook, it was perfect because it was like somebody was kind of reading their diary to me.
Yeah,
I
think
very effective.
Right, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so before we finish off, thank you for that. I just wanted to let you all know that for those of you that haven't read The Last, absolutely must. I point the right way around this time. Brilliant book. Thoroughly recommend it. Couldn't put it down. The horror, the crime, the end of the world. It was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. So please, if you haven't read it, you can either get a copy at the library, or our friends at Read, the bookshop in Home Firth, just read on their address, you can see that, are offering a 20% discount on Hannah's book. So if you can get down to Home Firth and go across to Read, it's right next to the library, can't miss it, and use this discount code. So that's CFHJ20. CFHJ20. You'll be able to get a 20% discount off the novel. So wonderful idea. So get yourself down to Home Firth and go and get a copy of The Last, because you'll absolutely love it. And then you want to go and buy a copy for a friend for Christmas. Perfect. Yeah. Or borrow a copy from your local library. We do have a copy for that. Okay, so I think we're handing over to our Hannah just to finish off now. Is that right?
Thanks for that, Kirsty. So it's been a fantastic evening. Thank you for joining us, Hannah. It's been really great. It's been a pleasure to have you with us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. It was really fun.
You're welcome.
Right, so we're handing over to Dave to just talk about the Cosmia Festival. Is that right, Dave?
Yes, please.
I'll put you on the screen. Oh, no, that's the wrong one. That's the right one. Sorry about that. There we go.
You'll let Hannah talk about the rest of the festival.
Sorry, Hannah, there you go.
So thank you so much, Hannah, for that. It was brilliant and a great kick-off to the rest of our kind of 10 days worth of talks and events. So I thought I'd talk you through very briefly all the other stuff that we've got going on, because hopefully there's things that you might be interested in. Our wonderful friends at Kirklees Libraries have got a whole raft of other authors that are appearing at the festival, and you'll be pleased to know that Read are offering that discount on all of the festival authors, which is a great offer. And the next book we're going to be hearing from the author of is this one, Across the Risen Sea, by Bren McDibble, who is tuning in all the way from Australia tomorrow morning, which is very cool. So yeah, check out the author talks. We are also doing some book club events where you can join me talking about books. We've got one of those on Sunday. That is the Book of Coley, which is a really great post-apocalyptic novel that it threw me for a loop because I realised it was set about 30 miles away from us here at Cosmia Festival. So really spooky in a different way to the last. We've got author talks, expert talks in association with our partners, University of Huddersfield. We have got board games and an actual in-person event, not an online event, with the People's Meeple, who is our local board game cafe, and even some extra whimsy, courtesy of the Writopolis duo of RJ Barker and Kit Power, which is coming on the last day of the festival. And finally, workshops for young people between 8 and 17. We've got tons of online stuff, all free, including, most relevantly, I think, for this, some creative masterclasses with the Clark Award-winning Jane Rogers. So she's doing hour-long sessions over 4 days for any young people that are interested in writing this kind of fiction to come and get some tips from somebody that's been doing it as a living for a very long time. So make sure you check out our website for all that information, and hopefully we'll see you at some future events.
That's lovely. Okay, thank you very much, Dave. And we'll say good evening. Thank you very much, Hannah. That's been absolutely fantastic start to the Cosmia Festival. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We've had a wonderful time. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Right, everyone, we can wave goodbye. That's it. Thank you very much, everybody. Good evening.
Thank you.